Afternoon, and yes, there we are, Ted Langdell here, and we are talking with Johnny Burke from several different places. We're going to find out all the different things that have happened, or at least many of them that have happened on his adventures that brought him to Yuba-Sutter and have kept him here in just a minute here. But want to tell you that we have lunch with Langdell every Wednesday here. Later this month, we're going to have a chef's surprise. Let me tell you a little bit about that. And so the chef's surprise coming up next week, that's April 20th. And then April 27th, we have Aaron Rose talking about his travels to Yuba-Sutter via Los Angeles and several extensive periods of time in China, actually. That'll lead us into Asian Pacific Heritage Month. David Reed will join us on Wednesday, May 6th, talking about the Sutter Theater for the Arts and the upcoming Mariachi Orchestra concert coming on May 6th. That's Cinco de Mayo leads into that. There's a whole bunch of other stuff going on. So please do some things like and follow our pages here if you can. We're going to take this camera and lose that. You know, this is it's an interesting experience trying to do several things at once. I don't know if you've ever tried to do that, but like and follow our page and let us turn on notifications so that you know when we are live. And when you do that, you will learn all kinds of interesting things. But let's talk to Johnny Burke. Let's actually get that off of Johnny's face. Johnny, where did you start?
Where did I start? Well, I was born in San Francisco, spent a few years in the Bay Area, and then my parents moved out to Santa Rosa, and that's where I really grew up. And went to school there, and a couple years at community college, and then transferred out to Sacramento State. And after I got my bachelor's degree, I've been in the greater Sacramento area ever since. And then a lot of things have happened since then, but to shorten that, how did I get here? We came here about 7 years ago to the Yuba-Sutter area. So it's kind of been our physical journey, geologic, I guess you could say.
So where did you grow up in San Francisco itself? It's at that time was probably a city of 400 to 600,000 people, pushing 1 million or something like that. What
so
part of the...
I never spent any time in San Francisco. I was just born there. And then the first 5 years, my parents lived in one of the surrounding cities. And then we moved to Santa Rosa. So
whereabouts?
In Santa Rosa?
No, where did you live in after you were...
I think it was San Bruno. I don't really
San
remember.
Bruno,
Yeah,
okay.
So I really don't remember. I remember from Santa Rosa on, but that's about it.
Okay. What was it like growing up in Santa Rosa?
It's a good area. I have a good family. My parents are still together after about 50 years, and they're doing great, and they raised myself and my sister really well, and that area is pretty popular now. It's really gone crazy with values of real estate over the past couple decades and stuff. It's a very expensive area to live in, but it's still a nice place. I go and visit my parents a few times a year, and we can spend some good time there. But it was a good place to grow up in.
How old are your folks now?
Let's see. I'll be my dad's gonna be 76 this year, and my mom will be 71. So.
All right. So, what influenced you as a youngster?
That's a great question. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that before. Great question. I love this. You get Langdell questions. You never know what's coming next. So what influenced me? A lot of different things. I grew up in a household that was Catholic, and I grew up in the Catholic Church, so I had a familiarity with God and things about God. But that wasn't prominent in our house. That was just one aspect. always been interested in sports and collecting. My very first job at 14 was working in a baseball card shop, and I've just been a kind of a collector all my life of things, and so that probably started there. And I'm not sure what influenced that, but just things that interested me and things that look cool, and it's always fun to complete something. So when I started collecting baseball cards, if it was a Topps baseball card set with 792 cards, I wanted to get all 792 so it was complete, and then go on to the next ones.
Well, it sounds like you had quite a baseball card collection.
I did. I had. I can't remember now. I ended up selling it for next to nothing years ago, because when I collected was the 80s and 90s, and the card market blew up as far as the number of cards they made, and so they were so readily available they weren't worth anything. Plus, the great majority of that player's errors was using steroids, and so now they're not worth hardly anything and stuff. And so, but I had well over 30,000 cards. I know I had a whole closet full of them, and it was hard to move them around.
So more cards than would have filled, well, not exactly filled the sanctuary here, but
no, I couldn't. That would have been something else.
So baseball cards lead to what?
Well, that was my first job, was working in a baseball card shop, and then that led to I got a job after that working at Kinko's Copy Centers, of all places, and worked there for a couple years. And then I got a job at a Payless store, which there's no Paylesses anymore; they're all Rite Aids. And then I started when I turned 18. I started my career of selling automotive parts. Started working at a Craig Auto Parts in June of 1994, and I worked there at Craigan's for several years, and then when I moved to Sacramento, I continued to work for Craigan's, and then I got into the dealership game, working for Ford dealerships, and I spent about 26 years selling auto parts at either aftermarket auto parts stores or at dealerships.
So, where did you sell cars?
Well, I didn't sell cars, just parts. Just parts.
Parts,
yeah.
okay.
Parts guy.
Parts is parts.
Yep, you got it.
Yeah, and in case you've wondered what I've been doing here, our camera on Johnny here had a little bit of an issue, so we had to go solve that problem. This live streaming business is really kind of, it's fun, but you're also kind of living on the edge, because you never know exactly what's going to happen, and sometimes your viewers go away. I see we have no one watching at the moment, but they may be watching later on. In any case, back to the story. So auto parts, how did that tie into any of your spiritual experiences?
It didn't, not at all, because when I started working in auto parts, it was right about the time that I stopped going to church. Like I said, I grew up in a Catholic home, and I went to Catholic church, and we went to church every Sunday. We went to the catechism classes. I was baptized very early on. I received First Communion, was confirmed. But when I got in my late teens, 18, 19, it was up to me if I wanted to go to church every Sunday or if I didn't want to do that. And frankly, at the time, alcohol, drugs, and women were more attractive than the church, and that's what drew me. And I didn't feel very comfortable in the church, because I knew I was doing a lot of things that weren't what I was supposed to be doing, and so I just left. And so for about a decade, I wasn't part of any church at all, didn't think about God, didn't even bother with that at all. That
seems to be a story that I've heard in a number of places.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a common story. I talk to people all the time about that.
So how did you become a pastor?
Well, a lot of things happened in between, I guess you could say. So I came to Sacramento to go to Sac State and get a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. My goal was to become a law enforcement officer, but it didn't happen for a variety of different reasons, mostly because of background issues, because of the decisions I made in my late teens and early 20s. And while I was still, I hired this beautiful, tall brunette named Chelsea as a parts driver, and she and I worked together for about 6 months, and then one day I thought, boy, I'd really like to date her, and we began dating, and that led to our marriage a couple years later, and Chelsea and I have been together over 20 years now. We'll be married 20 years in January. And so what happened during that time was when I married Chelsea, she was sick. She had a pain in her side, something going on. They were trying to treat her for Crohn's disease, but she didn't end up having that. They couldn't figure out what was going on. and she was very sick and in pain all the time. She couldn't work. She really couldn't go out very much. And one day she got to a point where she was so low and just didn't understand. She was very depressed with life because she was sick and in pain all the time, didn't understand why. So she called up her brother, who was a pastor, and she posed a great question for him that's a difficult one for any pastor to answer, let alone a family member. But she said, if there is a God, why am I in pain all the time? So he came over, brought a Bible with him, shared with her who Jesus was, what life was all about, a little bit about, I guess you could say, human suffering and the flawed condition that we've been in ever since the Garden of Eden, and gave her some hope that this life is not everything. It's the eternal that's the one that's important that a lot of people miss. And so when I came home that day from work, I didn't know she had met with him, and she was kind of nervous to tell me. She said, hey, I called my brother, and he came over, and he gave me a Bible, and I'm really excited. And I could see some hope in her eyes. I always get a little emotional telling the story because...
That's okay.
Oh, yeah, I'm not apologizing. I'm just explaining.
Indeed, I get it.
because I saw hope in my wife's eyes for the first time in quite some time. And so I said, as a good supportive husband, the best that I thought I was being at the time, I said, well, if we're going to do this thing, then we're going to do it right. We're going to go to your brother's church on Sunday. And so we went to his church that Sunday, and we had a very unique experience where we felt the presence of the Holy Spirit. And I just told Chelsea afterwards, I said, I don't know what they have there, but I need more of it. And what that was a relationship with Jesus. And so we began going to church, and within just a couple weeks after reading some of the Bible and really starting to understand who Jesus was, we really gave our lives over to him. We did the thing that, we did what people call the sinner's prayer all the time, but really it's just a decision to ask Jesus to forgive us of our sins and to come into our life and lead it and to begin to follow him. And so we started doing that. And Chelsea continued to get sicker and sicker. And there was many times where I would go to church alone. I mean, there was a stretch where some folks at church thought I was single, and they saw my ring and they said, "Hey, you're married?" And I said, "Yeah, my wife's at home sick." But when she could come, we started getting involved in different ministries. First, we started with little kids, like preschool age, helping out in the kids' classroom and teaching. And that was exciting, except that's not the age group for me. Frankly, if I have to tell you something more than twice and you don't do it, I get really irritated. And man, that age group, you got to tell them a lot of times to do stuff. And so I went from there into the elementary Sunday school kids room. And I worked in there for a couple of years and became the director of the elementary Sunday school for our church at the time, which was Spring Valley Church in Rockland, California. And I did that for several years, and I just loved seeing the kids just awaken to who Jesus was and what that could mean for their lives. And then during that time, I was involved in a lot of different things. I was involved in different men's groups, different Bible studies. I was going to Promise Keepers. I was going to men's retreats. We were going to marriage retreats. We were trying to do everything we could to learn more about Jesus. And in my Bible studies, I'd read something with the guys, and we'd start to talk about it. And I would just say, hey, I mean, look at this. Look what God's saying here, here, and here. And I would just start basically preaching, if you will. And folks started asking, they said, you ever thought about being a pastor? And I said, well, no, why? And they said, well, you're like preaching, you're like explaining the word, you know? And I started to realize, well, there was something special there. And my brother-in-law, who was our pastor at the time, he recognized it too. And so I began the ordination process through the Wesleyan church to become a pastor. And then eventually, I'm a reverend. I don't use that term. I'm not big on it. It just sounds old to me. I don't know. Maybe when I'm in my 60s, I'll use it. Right now, I'm in my 40s, so I stick with pastor. But so that journey, during that time, the first part of the program, it's about 6 core classes and some things that you do, and you can become a licensed pastor. And then there's an additional like 15 classes you take along to become ordained, including a big interview and kind of a presentation of different gospel topics and things like that. And so that process took about 7 years. In the meantime, when I became a pastor, which was early on, I ended up becoming our youth pastor over at our church. And I did that for 5 years, working with youth from the ages of 6th grade through 12th grade. And we knew that when I got ordained that God was calling us to lead a church. We had a great leader at our church, and he and I had a lot of the similar gifts. And so we knew that that eventually I was going to be going somewhere. And so one year I got a call that from my district superintendent saying, hey, the pastor in Marysville is retiring, and I'd like you guys to pray about that possibility. And I said, okay. Well, we didn't do much praying about it, but we drove right up here Sunday after church because we were in Rockland, and we didn't even know where Marysville was. We really didn't know. We had heard the name, and I had sold parts to body shops here, and I had no idea where Marysville was. I just knew it was somewhere on the way to Chico. And so we came up here and looked at the church, and frankly, the church was, from the outside, didn't look real good. Now, we're not a beautiful-looking building by any means on this today, but at least we have reflective windows where you can't see inside. But when we looked inside and we looked on the website, we just were like, kind of, I had a sinking feeling in my stomach. I thought, I had this thought, which isn't a very pastoral thought, and I've told this story many times, and I admit that to people, but I had this thought, man, what can God do there? That's really the thought that was in my mind. And I got a call from my district superintendent a week later saying, hey, that pastor's not retiring, he's going to keep going, and so I didn't even think about it. And so a year later, the pastor was here, which was Al Jolly, the planning pastor of the church, who had done many things. He's well known in the community, just a lover of people. Al and Celia are just amazing people. He did decide to retire. And this time I didn't have a weird feeling in my stomach. And when I left my church in Rockland that day after having this conversation, I went to drive to a friend's house to pick up some Girl Scout cookies. And as I was driving to his house, I ended up passing by two buildings that were where our church was when we first started going there, because our church it was growing. It went from one building to another building, and then we bought a building. And so as I'm driving by, I ended up driving by the first place, which is the place that really we felt the Spirit's presence for the first time. And in that building, it had now become a thrift store. I thought, that's interesting. And as I drove past it, I could see the second building that we had leased out for a while, and it was no longer a church. It was a comedy club. And before I had a chance to think about this, I so clearly heard God say, see, it's not the building. And I knew that God was answering my internal prayer from a year ago where I had said, what can God do there? And I wasn't ready to become a lead pastor. My wife and I weren't ready to become lead pastors that year before. But at this point, God said, okay, you're ready. And he just reminded me, it's not about the building where he does things. It's about through people's lives and through the community. And so I got to my friend's house, and he said, what's the matter with you? And I said, we're going to Marysville, man. He said, why? I said, because God said it's not about the building. and so we quickly, and I came home and talked to Chelsea, and she had been praying about it and just had a great sense of it too. And so we said, yeah, we're going to move to Marysville. And so we moved up here, and our church is small. We're considered bivocational pastors. It's not enough for a family to live on, although the church does do very well in giving us a salary and housing allowance every month. And so I was working part-time at Giveke Ford for the first 5 years we were up here. And that's a great place to work. Giveke's a wonderful spot. And then a couple years ago, I should probably rewind and tell you. I don't know. You haven't asked any questions in a while, so I don't know if you got anything on your mind. I've just been rambling on. But
Actually, a thought has a question. You probably know a gentleman who used to be as a salesperson at Giveke and is now pastoring up in Live Oak.
You talking about Sean Blount? Yeah. So Sean had left Giveke right before I came. But I had heard a lot about Sean when I was there, and I just met him in person just a couple weeks ago for the first time we connected, and I talked to him. He was at the Christian Community Network meeting, and he shared a little bit of his testimony. Great guy, really great guy. I heard nothing but fantastic things about him.
Well, I worked, there we go, right? Get the right titles up, folks. Everything is fine. But I worked with Sean's dad, Randy, at KUBA and Cool 104. Oh, cool. Back when I came back up here for my third trip through the radio station there. That was back in, 1988, in 1989, and so forth. And then we did some part-time stuff over there. But we worked with his dad, and his dad's had an interesting set of life experiences. Passed away a couple of years ago. Sad to see that, because he was respected by all the people that knew him. One of those people that when you hear people talking about him at memorial services and things, you go, gosh, I wish I'd like to have known them. So it'd be valuable that I did. So But you went from working at Give a Key to doing
working
what?
For the Homeless Consortium, and there's kind of a chunk in there I kind of skipped over. So we came here to, and by the way, the name of the church is New Beginnings Wesleyan Church, and we're located in downtown Marysville on C Street between 6th and 7th, and which we're sitting in right now.
616 actually.
616 is the address, yeah, and we're sitting here right now, so I know Ted knows where it's at, but for those watching, so you know. So when we came here, we had just come from a church in Rockland that had a ton of young families and a variety of different ages. And when we came here, there was just probably a dozen or so people that were going here at that time, and mostly older. And so we thought, okay, we're gonna be building up this congregation. And it's going to be a bunch of young families, and some new young families did start coming, and some new people. Whenever there's a new pastor in town anywhere, people get attracted and come and check it out. And so a couple weeks after we got here, a van rolls up in our parking lot Sunday morning, and all these homeless guys get out. And it's the Twin Cities Rescue Mission. And at the time, my assistant pastors, basically his in-laws, were directors of the mission, and they were looking to start services for their guys outside of the mission. They wanted their guys to get out in the public. So they said, well, we'll try our in-laws' church, and so they came here. And it was a really good fit. And so for the next 5 years, we were the home church for the Twin Cities Rescue Mission. And so if you came to our church on any given Sunday, we're not a big church. We probably, at that time, would run about 70 people on a Sunday. But you'd have 40, maybe even as many as 50 people in church that day that were either homeless or in a shelter or in some sort of transitional housing or recently homeless. And so we really got a name around town of just being a place where homeless were welcomed. And that's true. It wasn't just like something that you hear about that's not true. Everybody's welcome here. And it doesn't matter what you look like, what you're wearing, how you smell. You are welcome in the house of God. And so people came, and frankly, that was a church growth stunter, because if you want to grow young families in a church, if you have a bunch of rough-looking dudes, maybe with some bad criminal past, not the best way to grow a church. But that was the ministry that God had ordained for us at that time, and still. And so as we got to know a lot of these guys and really involved in their life, and then I began preaching once a month at the Twin Cities Rescue Mission, and we started getting involved with different fundraisers with the mission and doing a lot of things. After several years, I was asked to be on the board at the mission, so I got even more involved at the Rescue Mission. And around the same time, we found out about this group called REST, which stands for Regional Emergency Shelter Team. And REST is a cold weather shelter that operates in the Yuba-Sutter areas from November to April, and they shelter families and women. And the old model that they used to do was all the clients would show up at Hands of Hope at 5 o'clock, and then they would bus them to whatever church was going to house them that week, and then they would stay the night at that church. The church would provide a meal, and the next morning they'd go back to Hands of Hope, and that would happen for a week, and they would switch churches the next week. And so we became a host church for REST, and so we hosted for a week, and we provided some meals and got involved with them. And right when COVID was starting, when no one really knew much about COVID and there was this really concern for homeless, that was like the week that REST was supposed to end. And so we extended the REST season, but we let them stay here because we had to close the church because of shelter in place. And so we had REST folks staying here for several weeks in a row where they didn't have to leave. And we were just involved in everything homeless. And I was asked to be on the REST board at that time, and I'm on their board as well. And so, I'm sitting on 2 boards of different homeless shelters. Our church is full of homeless people. We're just doing homeless stuff all the time. We had gotten involved with the Homeless Consortium, and we would go to the monthly meetings to hear about what was going on with homeless efforts and things, and how we could make a bigger difference in helping people go from homeless to housed. And the Homeless Consortium was growing. They had gotten some big grants, and they knew it was time to hire an executive director. And so when I saw the job, I thought, man, that's the job for me. To direct this nonprofit that handles state and federal funds and collaborates with other agencies to work to help people that are in need. That sounds like an awesome opportunity. So I applied for the job, I got an interview, and I didn't get hired. And they chose somebody else, and it didn't work out with that person. They decided to relist the job. And one of the board members called me up and said, hey, you need to apply for this job. And I said, I'm not going to apply for the job again. You didn't hire me the first time. Like, what are you just trying to torture me or something like that? And he said, no, I really think you're the person for the job. And so my wife, Chelsea, had been working for the consortium for a couple years as the coordinated entry manager. She had been hired a couple years prior. And at the time when I had my first interview, there was 4 things that kind of stuck out on the interview that were tough for the board to look at. I had a lot of conflicts of interest. My wife worked for the consortium, so I was going to be her boss, so that's kind of challenging. I sat on 2 boards of homeless shelters that either received or could receive funding from the consortium. And at the time, I was planning on running for Marysville City Council. And so those were all different conflicts of interest, plus I had very little grant writing experience. So those are the things that scored me a little lower than other candidates, and I got passed over the first time. But I decided, I really felt like we'd been praying hard about if I should run for city council or not. And we asked God for confirmation, and all I kept getting was people coming to me going, I don't think that's a good idea. Or like, you're too busy for this. And they were right. And so we decided not to run for city council. I took a grant writing class to learn more about grant writing, and then I said, okay, I'm going to apply again. And I showed up, and I didn't have as many conflicts of interest. I had a little bit more experience, and there was less applicants, thank God. And I just told them, I said, hey, I told you I was the man for this job, and I'm the only one who's back again for it. So, and they made the decision to hire me in June or July of 2020. And so for the last couple of years, I've been the executive director of the Sutter-Yuba Homeless Consortium, and it's been an awesome job. One of the coolest things about my job is the people I get to work with. I love selling auto parts. I was really good at that. I love cars. I just love everything about that field. But you meet a lot of people in that field who, when you meet them, if somebody's young coming in, they go, oh, don't get in this field. You'll get stuck in here forever. It's a dead end. And people are bitter or feel like stuck in their jobs or whatever the case may be in different aspects of automotive. And really a lot of jobs are like that. You go places, people are bitter. The people that I work with, if they are involved in health and human services at any level, whether they're a social worker or an intake worker at one of our coordinated entry sites, whether they work for one of the counties working with homeless, and even our political officials that I work with, everybody I work with cares about people. And that is so refreshing to work with people who care about people. It really takes a lot of burden off things. And there's always stresses because we have to allocate money to different agencies and there's competition. But the people I work with, they care about people. And when you work with people who care about people, it goes a lot better, in my opinion. It's really nice. So, yeah, that's what I do. That's my day job, is working for the Sutter-Yuba Homeless Consortium.
And your afternoon and weekend jobs?
Well, I don't have any more paid jobs beside the church, I guess you could say, but we're here because we have we do a couple things throughout the week, and we do events, and of course Sunday I'm our primary preacher. Preach at the mission once a month. Get involved in a lot of community things. Love coaching my kids. Chelsea and I have 2 beautiful kids. We have a daughter named Corey who's 10 and a son named James who's 7. And both of them love to play baseball and softball. So for years I coached Corey's softball teams until she got to a level where it's beyond my expertise. She's in majors now with Marysville Little League, and we need better coaches with better equipment and experience. But I still coach my son's farm baseball team, and I love doing that. And then both our kids go to Faith Christian School, and they have a co-ed softball team there, and I coach that along with Dallas McBride. He and I coach one of the teams over there, so we get to work with kids, and just love doing stuff in the community. Big part of Say Love. I'm not one of the board members, but from probably the 3rd month on, we've been a part of being active at Say Love events and working with Jeff Stevens and Mike Buttacavoli and the whole team, and Stephanie McKenzie and John Nicoletti, and just really doing a lot of things in the area. So we love this area. It's so unique. And I know there's people who grow up here who just want to get out of here. But I love this area. I absolutely adore it. I love that I can't go anywhere without recognizing people and saying hi to people. And I've lived in bigger areas where you don't have that opportunity, or some of the people you see you really don't want to talk to. But here there's a sense of community. There's some great roots. There's great history here when you get in the historical aspect with how long the city's been around and some of the neat things. It's just a wonderful place to be. So that's why we've been here. It's going to be 7 years we've been here now. So that's pretty good. The average time for a pastor in a congregation, if you look nationally, it's like 5 years. So I'm like, yeah, we're rocking. We're doing great. So we're about to hit the 7-year mark.
So 7 years in Yuba-Sutter, and you've become a very well-known part of the community. What kinds of things have you seen that the community needs to work on?
I think there is a lot of times, especially when it comes to my field, there's this attitude of, I don't like how things are, or this is how things are, this is how they're always going to be, and there's nothing I can do. The more people who get involved, the better this community is going to be. Great example is Say Love. I really think our whole community looks better since Say Love became in existence 3 years ago. It really looks cleaner in a lot of different areas. And the more that people care about and get involved in their community making change, the better they'll do. When I first moved here, the very first time we preached at the church, we met some folks, and I said, hey, just so you know, I'm looking for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house to rent, if anyone knows of any, and in Marysville. And I didn't know much about the area, but people told me, well, you ought to really consider Yuba City. It's much nicer. And I said, well, I want to live in the town that we pastor in. That's my goal. And so, and I didn't realize how interlinked Yuba-Sutter was. I didn't realize you just had to jump across a bridge and you're there. But at the same time, I wanted to be here. But there was kind of this attitude of some people, oh, Marysville's not as nice as Yuba City. It's like, Marysville's wonderful. There's all kinds of wonderful things going on in Marysville. And I think it's gotten better since we've been here. And we try and get involved. A few years ago, our church was looking to get involved. So I kept calling up the city manager at the time and saying, hey, we want to do something. And I got no call back. So I showed up at city council one day and said, hey, I got a church full of people who want to do something. What can we do? And then I got a call back from the city manager. And we ended up, for a couple years, we did some work over at Miners Park in East Marysville, where we would just, because the city didn't have enough staffing availability to edge the park and weed eat and clean over graffiti, and so we did that for a couple of years. And that's the kind of thing that makes a difference. And so in my field of working with homelessness is going to take a long time to get everybody who's homeless to housed, because we have such a lack of affordable housing.
It's a long-term situation.
It's a long-term situation, and we're making gains, but at the moment, we have more people entering homeless every month than we're able to house. And until we can have more affordable housing available, we're just not going to be able to bridge this gap. The state's done a lot of good things program-wise, dollar-wise, to do affordable housing options, but we really need to capitalize on everything in our area that's possible. And one of the challenges with folks is something that in my field, we use this term called NIMBY. Not a lot of people know what NIMBY means, but NIMBY means not in my backyard. And so we might find a parcel of property that would be great for a shelter or a low-income housing project, and then we get neighborhood pushback. They don't want it there. They're afraid it's going to reduce the values or their whatever in their neighborhood, or they might have some more problems. And that's a challenge, because we want to have neighborhoods good and safe for people, but low-income housing doesn't make a neighborhood not safe. And shelters, when managed properly, can be just as good as anything. And so if we can get more people standing up saying, you know what, I really want to make a difference in my community. I'm tired of seeing people on the streets. I want to help them out. They got to support different projects that come in their area, or become involved themselves. It's a challenge. Housing is so expensive in California, and it's to build affordable housing is anything but affordable, because usually affordable housing truly means, by definition, that the folks living there are at no higher usually than 30% of the average median income for the area. So for our area, the average median, I don't have the exact stats in front of me, but the average median income, somewhere around $50,000 a year. So if you're at 30% of that, whoever's staying there has to be around $15,000, maybe $20,000 if it pushes up a year, which is, next to nothing, especially with the inflation we've seen lately. So if you want that person to live there, and that's what they're making, you can only charge them up to 30% of their income. You can only charge about $300-400 a month max. Well, to build housing and to pencil that out, it just doesn't pencil. If you were just a retail, for-profit developer to buy a parcel, develop it out, there's no way you could only charge $300 or $400 a unit. Whether it doesn't matter how small the apartments or whatever it was. You would have to get more to get a return on your money to be able to make back your money. So when you're doing affordable housing projects, you have to get help from either the state or the federal government in the forms of some sort of subsidies, some sort of tax credit financing, some sort of grants to pay for the property, the infrastructure. And so aligning that money with the properties that are available and getting community buy-in, that's the magic trick. That's the very difficult thing to do at times. There's times where we find great properties and we have the money and the community doesn't support it and a council or board doesn't approve it. There's other times where we have a great property and we don't have the money. So getting those things to come together is really the trick right now.
It's been kind of one of those things that I've watched develop in the last, 10 years. It's been slow, but it's been picking up speed, and that is that our community seems to be getting more together and more hands across the river kind of thing, where people are getting together and doing things. Say Love is a good example. We've had an opportunity to talk with Jeff. And when Jeff explained why he got Say Love started and what it's become, it's an opportunity for people to get involved who had no previous way of doing that.
Yeah, I agree. Our community is really linked, and so much so that the homeless consortium, it's called Sutter-Yuba Homeless Consortium, and all the federal funds that come to this area come to us for both counties. Same thing for state funding, and so we have to make decisions on both sides of the river. Each of the counties gets their own funding sources from both state and federal, and same thing for the cities. And so sometimes getting together regional projects is a challenge because you're working in two counties, and there's the homeless looks a little different on both sides of the river. It's very interesting. Yuba County has a higher percentage of homeless individuals than Sutter County. It's the two of them, when you look at some different trends, they're very different. But we're so close. It's very unusual because we're so close and so interlinked. At the same time, people, I hear this all the time, people are always concerned that we're putting money into homeless services and folks are coming here for services, and that really is not true at all. The most we ever see in any given month is maybe 15% of new homeless clients are from out of the area. And usually those folks are coming here because they have family here or they grew up here years ago. There's some sort of tie to the area. No one ever comes here for our homeless services. We just don't have that good at services. And we have good services, but it's not like you come in and get a ticket to a 4-star hotel, you know what I mean? So it's really challenging when I hear that from folks in the community. But there's a lot of work right now. I'm super excited that different municipalities are really addressing homelessness in different ways. Yuba City's putting a big push forward to do these community workshops, and they're inviting Sutter County to do the next one with them, and then they're going to be inviting Yuba County and probably Marysville to team up as well. And that's the kind of, we need regional approaches. And there's been a regional approach. There's been a bi-counties group that came up with our homeless strategic plan in 2019 that we've been working off of, and all the municipalities actually gave funding to the consortium to hire my position and to move forward on different projects to try and bring more resources in the area. So there's been a lot of good work that gets done, and as long as we continue doing that, we can make a difference. And I know for folks that drive down Colusa Highway every day, they feel like, hey, we've got a homeless problem here, because I see people out on Colusa Highway every day. And I see them too. I drive from Marysville to Yuba City every day to drop my kids off for school and whatever I'm going to. A lot of those folks that are on the street there are declining the services offered to them, and so it becomes a challenge to kind of move them along, and they kind of resettle in. But if you go to any other city, and I really mean like any other city in California, you will say, wow, we're doing great here, because you see entire blocks full of people that are just full of people camping in any cities. You don't have to go very far. If you go to Sacramento, they have a gigantic issue. And right now, a lot of their homeless are in along the American River Parkway, and they're trying to move them out of there. It's just going to move them into the cities. It's going to make people more frustrated. And we have affordable housing issues. They have it even harder than us because it's more expensive to live there and costs a ton to develop there. And so that's the challenge in California. Housing costs are through the roof. They keep going up. And it just becomes a real cycle. And so we're really trying to turn that around and capitalize on everything that we can.
At yesterday's Sutter County Supervisors meeting, there was discussion about taking the west side of the old Kmart parking lot, where there's about 15 or 20 parking spaces just west of the garden center area.
Correct. Between
there and the fitness center, and turn that for 60 days into a temporary trial experiment with RV parking from like 7 o'clock at night until 7 in the morning, so that people who have RVs as a home have some place to park them aside from on the street. And there was some discussion about just making sure that that particular location was only used for 60 days while the city and the county could figure out where to create a more permanent parking space, evening parking space for people who have homes on wheels but no place to park them.
Yeah, and that's been a big challenge. So so to kind of address that, first off, if you ever hear somebody says, hey, you know what, I'm gonna stop renting, I'm gonna buy a motorhome and live in it and park wherever, tell them it's a terrible idea. That's only a good idea if you're one of those people who can drive across the United States and stay at KOA campgrounds and stuff like that. It is very dangerous, very difficult. The vehicles break down. They don't get the right maintenance they need. It doesn't work out for folks. And a lot of people end up doing that, but they think it's a good solution because it's better than camping outside if you're homeless. But at the same time, it never works out really well. But the issue is we need to be able to provide an option for folks, because you can't just ask people to move somewhere unless you have a place for them to go. And that comes from a court case that happened several years ago that we call the Boise decision out of Boise, Idaho. What happened in Boise, and I want to say it was about 2016, somewhere in that range, there was a group of, Boise had a no camping ordinance, just like Marysville had, just like Yuba City had, just like every city in California had, and basically said no camping within city limits, period. And so anytime someone in Boise was camping, set up a tent and was literally camping, living there, they would move them along and say, hey, you can't be here because there's no camping in the city limits of Boise. Well, a group of homeless got together and sued the city, saying that we have a right to lay our heads somewhere. You can't just have a no camping ordinance. We have to have somewhere to go. And the courts agreed with them. They said that's a fundamental human right that, you know, if somebody comes into a city, they have a right to lay their heads somewhere. And so that changed everything. That changed everybody's laws, and that's when you really visually you saw homelessness blow up in California, because all of a sudden everyone in every municipality knew that they just couldn't move people. And so camps that were building, they were allowed to build. And what everyone realized right away is that you could move people if you could offer them things. Now, our area has done a great job in setting up some and some of the quick shelters like Life Building Center, 14 Ford, Better Way. We've always had the Depot and the Mission, and Rest has been around, but these emergency shelters that were set up quick to address that, they can get people in them quickly or same day if it's like Life Building Center. So if a law enforcement personnel is trying to move somebody out of an area, they can say, hey, we can offer you this place to stay. And then it's up to the person. And some people don't want to be inside, so you can say, well, if you want to camp over in Sutter County, they have an overnight camping spot on 2nd Street where there's a whole lot there set up where you can go in, set up your tent, camp there for the night, pack it up, and leave in the morning. So if your lifestyle is tent camp living, you can do it. You just have to break down and set up every day. But for the folks that needed a place to park, we didn't really have too many options for that. Folks would be allowed to park on 2nd Street, but it wasn't ideal. And so Sutter County's been working for a while with the state of California on a piece of property that was supposed to be for that, but it's just been held up by so many things. And so they said, you know what, we're going to give it a trial run and see how much we need for this, you know, how much use this would get. And so that's why they set the 60-day limit, just to see how it's looking. But that'll give folks that are living in their motorhomes a place to park safely and not be in a place where they're not supposed to be, like Walmart parking lot. You're not allowed to park overnight or just on city streets or whatever. And it'll be a place where they can go and safely be, and then they drive their vehicle out in the morning. So that we'll see how that goes. We'll see how used that is. There's people have a variety of different things that they want to be able to do, and you have to kind of accommodate their lifestyle to a certain degree. And so we'll see how that works out. It should be starting up pretty soon after they get up some temporary fencing and things like that.
I'm Ted Langdell, and we are talking with Johnny Burke, who is the executive director of the Sutter-Yuba Homeless Consortium, and also is a pastor here at the New Beginnings Wesleyan Church in Marysville. So, over your shoulder we see the cross, and Easter is coming.
Yes, sir.
Tie Easter and homelessness and forgiveness together for us.
Okay, wow, all right. Boy, another Langdell question. Here we go. So Let me say this. Let me tie Easter and forgiveness in together, and then tie homelessness and our view on that, because I think that would be a little bit more appropriate. So, I know that you know, Ted. So I'm preaching to the choir here. But for those that are listening, we don't celebrate Easter for Easter bunnies and eggs. That's not what Easter is about. Easter is the day we celebrate the fact that Jesus Christ rose from the grave, just like he said he would, just like the scriptures written hundreds and thousands of years foretold, and is in heaven. And when Jesus did that, he showed that he was God in the flesh. And when he was here, he said that anybody who would come to him would have eternal life. There's a famous passage that he is quoted saying that it's in, if you look in the Bible and you flip to the New Testament, there's a book called John. And in the 14th chapter, at the 6th verse, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. Well, our understanding of that is the Father is Father God, and that place of coming to is heaven. And then if you want to be in heaven and live eternally, you would have to come to Jesus. And the reason we know that Jesus is God in the flesh is because he did rise from the dead, because no one's ever done that before. And that's exactly, and he said it would happen just like he said it would be 3 days. And I can go on, I'm really shortening it up right now, right? There's so much to say about that. So Easter is the big deal. If you want, as far as churches go, it is like the Super Bowl of Sundays for us. Because without Easter, we have no hope. We just knew a guy who was a great preacher, he did miracles, but then he died, and that was the end of his story. But that's not the end of the story. And Jesus said that if anyone comes to him, they'll be able to go to heaven. And as simple as just praying to him to ask for forgiveness of your sins and allow him to come into your life and lead you. And that's what we celebrate. That's what church is all about, and that's what Easter is all about. Tying that into homelessness, I don't know that there's any direct correlation from Easter, forgiveness, and homelessness, but Jesus was always helping out the least of these. And at one point, he's quoted as saying, hey, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was naked, you gave me clothing. And his disciples say, well, how did we do that for you? We never did that for you, Jesus. We never gave you food, water, clothing. And he said, look, anytime you did that for the least of these, you were doing it for me. And so we know that we are called to help anybody out. You read through the Bible, it doesn't matter where you go, there's a call to help out widows and orphans, and there's plenty of those on the streets, but there's a call to love your brother. Jesus says, when he was asked, he was always being questioned by the religious people at the time, and one time they asked him, because they knew that there was the 10 Commandments, but the overall Mosaic law, which is the law that comes from the book of Moses, has all these different rules for the Jewish people, has like over 330 rules, right? And so they wanted to really test Jesus and say, what's the number one rule? And so they said, what's the greatest commandment? And Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, your strength, your soul, and your mind. And the people were probably appeased with that, but then he goes, and the second one is like it. He says, love your neighbor as yourself. And so if I go home at night, close my door, turn on my heater, get in my warm bed, my neighbor is not just the person living next door to me. My neighbor's the guy out on the street with the cardboard sign and the blanket over his shoulder. Or my neighbor is the guy who's couch surfing on his buddy's couch because he's got nowhere to go. Or my neighbor is the single mom with her kids who's sleeping in her car or maybe a motorhome. And so working with folks that are experiencing homelessness and trying to get them to housing is what I think Jesus would want us to do.
Somehow forgiveness is a big part of what Jesus preached in terms of forgiveness of our sins, God's part to us. But that example also works in reverse in terms of forgive us our sins as we forgive those who trespass against us, whatever that kind of trespass may be. And I think that also applies for us being able to learn how to forgive ourselves for what we may be thinking about our own attitudes, and to learn how to do something different and replace those behaviors that aren't working with something that does work, so there's no vacuum that causes one to go back to those old kinds of behaviors. And I think that what you're doing has a lot to do with people learning how to be able to forgive themselves for whatever circumstances they may find themselves in. And be able to become born anew in a way.
Yeah, I think that's great. And when you look statistically at the folks on the street, some of the folks are there. It is 100% not their fault. Life hit them with a 2x4, and they are trying to recover from it. A lot of the folks are dealing with various issues that they probably couldn't control either: mental health, behavioral health issues. There's some folks dealing with substance issues. There's all kinds of things going on that gets somebody into homeless. And the great majority of us are just one paycheck away from being out on the street. And a lot of us, even if we're that one paycheck away, we have support systems to help us out. And a lot of the folks you meet that are experiencing homelessness, they didn't have support systems. I recently, we helped out a woman with a very simple helping. She was living with her mom. She didn't have a job. She had some disability. She was unable to work, but she was in her 50s, and she was living with her mom, who was in her 70s. And her son lived up here. She was down in San Diego. Her son lived up here. He's in his 30s. He's got his kids. And she talked to him, and they agreed to have her come live with him so he can kind of take care of her, and she could spend more time with the grandkids. Well, within a couple days, they get in a big fight, and he throws her out. So all of a sudden, she's homeless. And she has no support system. She doesn't have a dime. She doesn't have any way to get back to San Diego. She doesn't have any way to get in this house. She's homeless, and she has no other family or friends who can help her out at all. So this was an easy one for us. We were able to buy her a bus ticket. We called up her mom, and her mom said, "Yeah, I'd love to have her come live with me again." And she said, "Yeah, I guess I'll go back with my mom." Bought a bus ticket. That was probably the simplest fix for somebody experiencing homeless. But we have folks that maybe when they're in their 20s, they started using hardcore drugs, and then all of a sudden it really started to affect their brain chemistry. And now that they're suffering with some different issues, or they've been diagnosed bipolar and schizophrenic, and they might have some good days, and they might be on medications where things are going good, and then one day they get off their medications and they have one bad day, and they get thrown out of wherever they are, or lose their job, or whatever the case may be, and they're out on the streets again, and there's no support systems for them. And so a lot of times we have to really look at that person and forgive them for what they may have done if they've done something, and just work toward restoring them. Just like God looks at us, forgives us for our sins, and has restored us and has given us a position in heaven.
Wonderful. We've been talking with Johnny Burke right here on Lunch with Langdell. I'm Ted Langdell, and we've got several other cool shows coming up. Lunch with Langdell is just kind of basically where we don't seem to be eating while we're doing Lunch with Langdell, but it does happen at the noon hour. So maybe what we're actually doing here is an informational buffet, if you will, of what we're doing. So we've been talking with Johnny, and coming up we will have a chef surprise coming up next week. Haven't yet booked the guests, but we've got a couple of guests that we're looking forward to that we hope will enable us to talk more about Earth Day and recycling and kind of cool things like that. Then we've got Aaron Rose, who's actually been listening here to what we're doing and talking about his experiences growing up in LA, in China several times, several other parts of the U.S. And I think you were in Santa Rosa, weren't you?
I was.
So a couple of Santa Rosa people here. We run into all kinds of people here, and that's one of the interesting things that I love about the Yuba-Sutter area. I mean, you can find interesting people anywhere, but we find them here on Lunch with Langdell, and we try to bring them to you. So also coming up, we make sure I punch the right buttons here. We have Ted Langdell. There we go. Coming up ahead, we're working with the Chamber of Commerce on the Chamber forums coming up for Yuba and Sutter County electoral candidates that'll be running in the June primary. So as you want to get your ballot ready to go or find out more about these candidates, you'll be able to do that on the 25th of the month with Sutter County candidates beginning at 6 o'clock right here and on the Chamber Facebook pages and elsewhere. Also coming up on that's Wednesday, April 27th, the Yuba County Candidates Forums also beginning at 6 o'clock. So please like and follow our pages and channels to be notified when we go live. And you can support our live streams. If you look down in the bottom or up on top of the text, that surrounds the video that you're watching, you'll find some links. If you find our programming useful to you, helpful, feel free to help us pay the bills that enables us to deal with live streaming technology, the internet service that brings you all of this sort of thing. We would love to be able to count you as one of our supporters. And we do get support from a number of people. Brent Hasty, among them, Gary Bradford, and I'm probably forgetting 3 or 4 other people. But we would love to have you help us do that. And it's been wonderful talking with you for the last hour, roughly. And I hope we can do it again fairly soon.
Sure. Can I say one last thing before you
Absolutely.
sign off there? Just a couple plugs on the church side. New Beginnings Wesleyan Church. We are having a Good Friday service at 6 o'clock on Friday. That'll be at our church at 616 C Street. It's called New Beginnings Wesleyan. And on the Sutter-Yuba Homeless Consortium side of things, we are having a stakeholders meeting tomorrow morning, Thursday at 9:45 via Zoom. If you're on Facebook, which you probably are if you're watching this, you can type in Sutter-Yuba Homeless Consortium. You'll find our page, and you'll see the agenda that was posted this morning, and it has the Zoom meeting ID and link. And that's a great place. If you want to know more how you can make a difference in helping people move from homelessness to house, start coming to those monthly stakeholder meetings, hear what's going on, see if there's any needs by any of the agencies doing the work in the community, and that's a great way to get you plugged in. Thanks, Ted.
All right. And there you have it. Talking with Johnny Burke. I'm Ted Langdell. We are with Yuba-Sutter Live. And you might say we're sort of Yuba-Sutter's version of C-SPAN in terms of some of the things that we cover on Tuesdays politically, with all the political meetings that are going on, Tuesdays all day long. And then our lunch with Langdell that we have here on every Wednesday. And so we hope you'll join us again next Wednesday at noon for the chef's surprise, whatever that turns out to be. And then every Tuesday for whatever is going on with Yuba County and Sutter County Supervisors, Yuba Water Agency, both Marysville and Yuba City Councils, and Yuba City Unified and Marysville Unified School Boards. If you watch long enough, you're going to learn about what's going on with the different agencies that have a role in shaping what happens here in Yuba-Sutter. You'll get a chance to know the people, and you'll get a chance to know some of the challenges and what they can do to help here in Yuba-Sutter. All right, so that's our show for today. This is Lunch with Langdell, and it's right here on Yuba-Sutter Live.